Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I'm your host, Chuck Everson, and my co-host, as always, is smiling Sonny Spera, my man. How are you, Sonny?
Chuck, I'm great. You got me on the edge of my seat now with some of these intros, like literally. It's like
I had some fun with some of the intros. I have to say, it's been good. It's kind of been like our thing now, So.
Yeah, you set the bar high every time, man. I just hope that I can just fill those shoes. You know what I mean?
Well, listen, you're always smiling. You're a dentist, for Pete's sake. If you're not smiling, you're out of business, right? So that's a good thing. So, hey, listen, we have a great show today, Sonny. We have a really, really great guest. I'm excited to talk to this guy. He's been around for a while doing what he does. He's one of the best in the business at what he does. And we've had a lot of people in the media. We've had a lot of color commentary guys. We had a lot of play-by-play guys. Sean was on, McDonough, and Bill Raftery was on, and we've had some media people with Hoops Weiss and stuff. This guy, Sonny, our guest today, has gone from Sports Center to the NBA, from college football to the NFL, and from March Madness to the Masters. He's done everything in between. He's probably the most recognized voice in all of sports, the great Tim Brando from CBS and Fox Sports. How are you today, Tim?
Great, Chuck. Sonny, thank you for having me. And I've got some. You said it was like a bar. Well, this is a coffee cup. This is a coffee
Cheers.
cup with something. This is a coffee cup with something from a bar. Okay.
Okay.
And you mentioned Raft and you mentioned Sean, two of my really favorite people. So, as we like to say in the South, you guys have me traveling in some high cotton, coming on after those guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really it's been some adventure we've been on, Sonny and I, with this whole Big East Rewind thing, Tim. It's really opened up a lot of relationships that we didn't have with other guys that we played against. You had a certain opinion of certain people and certain teams, and come to find out you were completely wrong. You were completely wrong on what you thought. Who knew, Tim, that the Hoyas and the Orange Man over there can get together so well and get along and laugh and joke. In fact, we had Billy Martin and Jeannie Smith on, and Gene stopped the interview, and in the middle of the interview, he goes, "Hey, we're ruining our reputation, Billy. We're laughing and joking with a Wildcat and an Orangeman." He goes, "We should growl into the camera or something and keep our image up."
Yeah,
so we've had a lot of fun. So
Tim, can you see Chuck's background? Can you see where he's sitting?
Oh yeah.
All right. I want to commend you for at least competing with him for the best montage of material. That's great. That's so great.
What you don't see is how cluttered my room is. When I did my radio show that was televised for a period on CBS Sports Network, which I don't think is any larger now than when I left it. I did get this, Sonny. You'll like it. Okay. We had a segment called "Who's Sitting in the Helmet."
Look at that.
I do have the Orange taken care of here.
There we go.
So, Chuck, I remember Villanova, hell of an FCS or Division I AA school.
Yep.
Won some national titles, Howie Long, all that.
Right.
I still need a Villanova helmet. So it's just for the record.
Let's see if I can make that happen.
See if you can make that happen for me. But
I'll have to call Howie.
I basically had to bring all the things from my set, which was about 10 minutes away from the chateau. I actually did my radio show for years up here in my study. And then when CBS wanted to televise it, they forced me to go into a sound studio not far away where some records were made years ago. And so I had to bring all the stuff here, and I literally have to step over football helmets to get to my room. But it's cool. It's the only thing at Chateau Brando that's not pink, lavender, dusty rose, or mauve. I have nothing but girls in my family.
Right.
They've made nothing but girls except one little boy. I have one grandson named Spencer, named after Tillman. What does that tell you about respect?
Right.
My oldest daughter has a child that's a boy. She names it after my partner in the booth in college football. All right. I can't get anything better than a middle name. Spencer Brando Cruz, but the room is blue and brown. Okay. The only things blue and brown in my house besides this room are my eyes and my feelings. That's it. Everything else it's like a Barbie house here.
Swimming in the estrogen ocean.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
all the time. All the time.
So let's kick this off, Tim. Where did you get the bug to get into the broadcasting thing? Was it when you were a kid or when it?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I was born into it, Chuck. I had a father that helped put a couple of television stations on the air in my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
He was an entertainer. He was a writer, producer. Back in those days, early days of TV, which, I was born in 56. So you can do the math. He was doing radio, and then he was already on television when I was born. So he had local shows. Network television was really not there yet. So all the television stations were airing local programming. So he had a kiddie show, like a Captain Kangaroo kind of thing.
Yeah.
He had a Dick Clark sock hop on Saturdays. He had a kiddie show on Saturday mornings called Tops for Toys, where kids would bid on toys with bottle tops, and he'd play cartoon shows. And then he had his own variety show on Sunday nights where his band, a floor show band, they called it in those days, Brando and the Dreamers, would play. And he'd have guests on the show. And he also did a sort of a Ted Max amateur hour, okay, to bring you up to speed. Well, the next generation, it would be Star Search. The next generation, American Idol. Okay, right. He did that kind of show as well. So anything and everything that could be done locally, my dad was doing. And so I spent all of my life really in a television station and watching him in front of the camera and behind the camera. So I knew I was going to be in TV, and I knew I was going to be in front of people. And he put me in front of people. I was part of the act with the band. I became a member of the Musicians Union Local 116, because in order to play in bars or to go to Vegas, I had to be a union member.
Mm-hmm.
So as a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, I was part of the band, and I would come out with my little tuxedo on and want to be a part of the show. And he'd make me sing a song with him. So we did a couple of duets, Me and My Shadow, and Too Old to Cut the Mustard Anymore, and that kind of thing. And then he said, well, can you play an instrument? And I'd play the drums. And I'd play Wipeout, do my version of Pediatric Buddy Rich. And he let me hang out with the band the rest of the day. So I was going to be in front of people no matter what. But that entire time, from the time I was 7, I don't remember a time when I did not want to be a sportscaster. I was watching Kurt Gowdy, Jim Simpson, Keith Jackson, Ray Scott, Jack Buck. Those were my heroes. And I was a decent enough athlete and wanted to play ball as well as call ball. So if I wasn't, out playing with my friends, in the sandlot, I was playing by myself and calling the game while I was playing by myself.
I was just going to ask you that. I had read that. What are you talking about? When you were like shooting around in the driveway or something, you're calling the game like you're in the game.
I'm Chris Schenkel working with Jack Twyman, and it's the 76ers against the Celtics on a Sunday afternoon. Okay. Hondo throws it down on the low block to Russell. Chamberlain puts a body on him. And there's K.C. Jones, a backdoor cut up and over Hal Greer. On the other side, the Kangaroo Kid looks long. He finds his man. There's Wally Jones from downtown. Sixers tied at 2. I was doing that. And
never inserted yourself into the game, Tim?
No.
You could have been
you could have been an all-star. Yeah.
Could have been a contender.
I was doing impressions of the players. In other words, Wally Jones had the old Arkansas shot. He would take the ball behind his head and throw it up. I would actually try to not only call Wally Jones, but perform a Wally Jones shot from deep. Kind of hard to do Wilt Chamberlain when you're 4'2", but I would play with my back to the basket, try to do the little finger roll, turn around, finger roll layup.
Sure.
It was nuts. It was crazy. The people I was in our front yard. We had a basket in the front yard. And I remember from time to time, now you got to remember, this was the this was the segregated South. This is like 1962, 63. And
Yeah.
so we did not have at our home a maid that would come every day, but people in our neighborhood did. Okay. And there was a trolley company that would bring all of the people that worked, or as the movie said, the help. Okay.
Right.
They would drop off the help and they would begin walking down. And I remember many times these ladies would be getting off the trolley and walking to the homes where they were working, and they would just look and laugh at me and laugh. And then as I got older, I realized they must have been saying, "Oh my God, there's that kid talking to himself again," you know, because they were laughing loudly. Okay. Like, here's that kid entertaining us again on a summer afternoon. And I did that all the time. And I did the same thing with baseball, by the way. Front yard, I would just throw a wiffle ball up.
Yep. Okay.
Starting lineup for the middle of the order for the San Francisco Giants was Mays, Jim Ray Hart, and Willie McCovey. And I would throw the ball up, and Phil Necro is throwing for the Braves today. And so I did it with every sport. Okay. I was never bored. I was always getting ready for becoming a sports broadcaster. And sometimes that meant playing my own game with myself and playing role of host of whatever world I was in that particular day.
So all kidding aside, with what you were doing, that gave you a comfort level to be able to call a game when you got to that level in your career, right?
Yeah, and my dad facilitated that. He had been in the television business a long time, but as so oftentimes can happen in life, his dreams didn't come necessarily all true, and he got into the hotel and motel business. Owned a piece of a few hotels. One was in Monroe, which is 100 miles east of my hometown in Shreveport. Yeah. And in that town is a high school that's won a lot of state championships, a real juggernaut, Neville High School. They needed an announcer. They lost their play-by-play guy for Friday Night Football. And the owner of the station knew my dad really well. Almost everyone did. Dad was quite a pioneer. And so the owner of the station came by and talked to my father and said, his name was Hub Brando. He said, listen, we lost our announcer for Neville High School. It's a big thing for us on Friday. We make a lot of money on our AM radio station. Can you help us out? And my father, knowing what I wanted to do, said, sure, as long as you let me pick my second banana, the guy that works with me. The guy had no idea it was going to be his 14-year-old son.
Right.
Well, he brought me out. First game was Captain Shreve High School in my hometown in Shreveport, playing host to Monroe Neville High, September 10th, 1971. And my father called the play-by-play in the first half. I was the, quote, second banana color analyst. At halftime, we reversed roles, and I became the play-by-play guy. And it went really well. And people were kind of amazed that this 14-year-old kid whose voice hadn't changed yet still had a pacing about calling the game that sounded like he knew what he was doing. So this coming September 10th of 2021 will be the 50th anniversary of my first broadcast with my father. So at 65, I can say I've actually been doing this regularly every weekend, calling football, either a Friday high school game or a Saturday college or pro NFL Sunday for 50 years.
That's phenomenal.
Something else.
It got a little better when your voice evened out, right? I mean, probably
a little better, yeah. But you know, the funny thing, Sonny, I can look back. I still have the cassette tapes of it.
Oh my God,
cassettes were just out back then.
Yeah.
I remember in the 5th grade, I think it was 1969, somewhere in there, 68, 69. Cassette tapes were the thing, and having a cassette recorder was a really big deal. And I would take that cassette recorder into my room, you know, classic story. All announcers tell this story from my generation. Turn the sound down to some extent and call the game off television. And then I'd go back and listen to it as a kid. But after we did these games on Friday nights, my dad had it taped and I would, on the way back, I got out of school every Friday. This is something else I should tell you. The principal of the junior high that I was in, remember in our day, Chuck, middle school was really junior high, and it was 7, 8, 9. High school started in the 10th grade. So I'm in the 9th grade. My high school principal was living down the street, had neighborhood schools. And my mom and dad convinced my principal to allow me to check out of school on Friday, every Friday at noon during the fall, so I could get on a Continental Trailways bus, be driven to Monroe, 100 miles away, to meet my dad to go call the games.
Wow.
That kind of independence and the world that I was growing up in enabled me to do things that I don't know in today's world could ever happen again. So I tell people the calendar was really, really good to me in so many ways.
So you finished high school, and obviously you have a thought of a career path, and then college. You went to college.
ULM, University of Louisiana Monroe, Northeast Louisiana University then. Well, and the reason I went, well, I had a speech and debate scholarship. I had, while I was in high school, I played baseball all the way through high school, played basketball through middle school.
Okay.
When we desegregated, our 8th grade basketball team, you guys will love this. Our 8th grade basketball team was undefeated, won the city championship, and I was a starter. Now, I wasn't a star, but I was a starter. I was a small forward. I could probably go for, I'm going to guess my numbers were around maybe 10 and 3, a game.
That's
but
good.
We played all zone. It was all white. Then in the 9th grade, we had our sort of Texas Western Kentucky moment because all the J.S. Clark, the all-black school, was also undefeated. And busing began in 1970, which was right in there, 8th grade going into 9th grade. And our coach decided, all right, fellas, I don't know what else to do, but we're just going to play. We didn't need shirts versus skins. We knew who was on whose team. We played, and let's just say I knew that would be the last year I ever played basketball. They were playing a game with which I was not familiar. And I was going to be playing baseball through high school. But I spent a lot of time when I wasn't playing ball working in speech and debate. And I highly recommend to young people today that are considering a career in communications that it's not just about the sports. It's about the ability to communicate, the ability to persuade and to get people to believe in what you're saying.
Right.
To have a connection to your audience and be able to speak to them in a way that convinces them that you know what you're talking about. And debate really helped me in that area. And I had won the state tournament for broadcasting and speech and debate at Northeast Louisiana University 2 years running. And they gave me a scholarship, which was a half ride. Half my tuition was paid. So I went there in 1975 and 6 and loved it. Did really well, but I was also in the midst of having weekend jobs in television and in radio while I was in college. And ultimately I left early because guys that were trying to get out of school wanted to have jobs like I already had. So it was a great experience, but I was one of those that had a lot of opportunities because of the great start and the advantages that I had from getting a great start at age 14.
So when you're in college, like you said, you didn't finish, but so you really had, your communication. So you had a kind of a clear path. So as you transition now to the next step in your life, what did that look like? Because you said you're going, not graduate, you're going against people who've graduated with jobs you've already done. So what was the next step for you?
Well, I think the thing you got to remember is that in those days, in the 70s, not a lot of people were leaving school when they had it was experience then. Okay. Right. If you had jobs, if you had been working in radio and in television and the red light came on and you were ready to go, you were going to get hired. Okay. That's the way it was back then. Now that has changed dramatically since then. But those of us that came from that background in radio, it happened a lot. It happened a lot with NBA people Eddie Doucette with the Milwaukee Bucks. Marv Albert, was out quickly because he was a prodigy. Marty Glickman had been working with him when he was very, very early in his career, and he had opportunities. The same sort of thing happened with me. It was just about taking it seriously and getting the platform where more people would see you. Mm-hmm. And after getting married in 1978, I went down to Baton Rouge. That would have been the year that I would have graduated. And I got married that year. And that was when I knew, hey, I need to have a job that I can keep because it's not just about me now. It's about my wife. It's about my family that I want to have. And LSU had a new idea called Tiger Vision, a university-run network, way ahead of its time. An athletic director that had come in from Miami that had worked for Joe Robbie with the Miami Dolphins. His name was Bob Broadhead. He was a real visionary. And he wanted to start a pay-per-view cable channel in Baton Rouge and throughout the state of Louisiana, where live sports and then all tape sports of literally every sport they had on campus would be televised. Now think about that. We're talking generations ago.
Unreal.
And now we're seeing conference networks, Big Ten, ACC, SEC, Pac-12, all have networks. Yeah. Well, LSU was way ahead on that. And I became the voice of LSU basketball and football in 1982 while working in Baton Rouge and New Orleans as a local broadcaster. And having tapes of me calling games involving, Final Four teams like LSU's in 81, they were coming off a Final Four in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. You might recall with Rudy Macklin and that crew. In 82, they started Tiger Vision. And, people like Charles Barkley were playing at Auburn. Akeem Olajuwon was a freshman at Houston. All those people were on Dale Brown's schedule. And now I had tape to send out. I had quality tape of outstanding basketball to send out. And opportunities started coming my way within the syndicated world, the Ms. Lou's, the Raycoms, the Jefferson Pilots. All of them had opportunities, Metro Sports. And that got me exposed. And then ESPN came along in January of 1985. I did my first game between Duke and Virginia on January 5th, 1985. I was still working in local TV in Baton Rouge at that time at the CBS affiliate and doing Tiger Vision. And after that game with Dickie V and Timmy B in Charlottesville, Virginia, the world opened up for me in a very large way. And that also was the first year I did my first Big East game, which is another story that you'll enjoy.
We got to get to that, but I do have to make one comment to make sure Chuck understands. Marv Albert, Marty Glickman, a little Syracuse reference right there, okay?
Yeah, he doesn't fail to
I hear enough about Villanova, you know what I mean? So let's take a little bit.
Yeah, by the way, I'm speaking of Marty Glickman, and I'm going to just get ahead of you guys on the first Big East game because it just brings back so many memories. I was a real student of the history of broadcasting because of my father. He had been a sports writer too before he got into television. He had done radio, television, newspapers, all of it. Had great journalistic skills. And when he knew what I wanted to do, he was filling me with all this information. I knew about Bill Stern. I knew about Russ Hodges. I knew about Red Barber, Vin Scully, Mel Allen, all great announcers with huge personalities, and most of them from the South. Southern broadcasters may have to get rid of the South in the mouth, but most Southern broadcasters had bigger than life personalities. That was certainly true with Mel Allen and Red Barber.
Yeah,
that had pedigree from the South. But I remember vividly the first Big East opportunity because Steve Anderson, Dave Anderson's son, who worked for years, Pulitzer Prize winning sports writer with the New York Times. Steve was a young executive producer. He was a young producer coming up at the time. And he had to convince Dave Gavitt that it was okay for a guy from the South, the Deep South, to do a Big East basketball game. So they were championing me big time. And Dave, I think, had trepidation about it. They put me on a game between St. John's and Villanova. And I will never forget going into what is now Carneseca Arena for the very first time. The PA announcer was Bob Shepard. Bob Shepard.
Bob Shepard, yeah.
Okay. and that was just, oh my God. Just I'm about to say, we welcome you back. This was after we did the Open. Okay. Raft and I do the on camera to start. This is like my 5th or 6th college basketball game to call. But I was so excited because it was a Big East. And we come back and I say, okay, now we're ready for the starting lineups. And with them, here is public address announcer Bob Shepard. Barry Sachs, a longtime associate producer and later became an executive at ESPN until recently, is in my ear. You don't say that. You don't just say Bob Shepard. It's like, what? You say Mr. Bob Shepard. I was like, oh my God, excuse me. You know, New Yorkers, by God, that is Mr. Bob Shepard. So I said, okay, I apologize. So when he got through, I said, we thank Mr. Bob Shepard for the starting lineups to our game. Rolly got thrown out, Chuck, in that game. I don't know if you remember it. Rolly got thrown out, and he got thrown out after he saw Louis go nuts. And Mickey Crowley was calling the game. He's the lead rep.
Yep.
So I wanted to be a good guy. It was my first game. I was very excited. You know, the Marriott right across the street in Queens.
Yep.
From actually right across the street from LaGuardia.
LaGuardia
was where everybody was staying whenever we did a game at St. John's. And so the commissioner, Gavitt, and Mike Tranghese, and everybody from the Big East. I want to say Tommy McElroy might have been in the room too, and God rest his soul. And Mickey Crowley are all there, and they're having a libation or two. And I come walking in. Rolly had gotten thrown, but Louis had almost gotten thrown just before that. So I said, again, I'm a little wet behind the ears, young kid in his first Big East game. I said, Mickey, you got to tell me, what did he say? Well, he MF'd me. I said, okay. So he said the magic words. Yeah, absolutely. Now he confessed to the priest as he was walking out. He MF'd me. So I said, well, why did he go off? He says, well, he said that Louis had F'd me too. Well, I said, well, he did, didn't he? He says, yeah, but nobody understands Louis, no matter what he said.
That's classic.
Maybe Louis Carneseca might have been the only coach in the history of basketball that could mispronounce the F word.
You know what?
Rolly had the Professor Erwin Corey hair going and the shirt tails out. When he said the F word, you knew you had been F'd. Okay.
There's no doubt about that.
I thought you'd like that story.
Absolutely. That's great. Now, I want to take you a step back before we continue with the Big East, because I really want to hear a lot about the Big East, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about these two guys.
Mm-hmm.
So you worked at LSU, all right? So obviously you work with the great coach, Dale Brown, okay? And I know
very influential man in my life.
So I want to ask you about Dale Brown. And I know during your time at ESPN, you were very close with John Saunders, who happened to be one of my favorite guys too. On air. Talk about those two guys and your relationship with those two guys and what they meant to you in your career.
Dale, because basketball was just not a very big deal in our home state. When he came into Louisiana in 1972, he inherited Press Maravich's program, Pistol's dad. And he had just recruited the first ever African-American player who was a freshman just when freshmen were eligible. that rule came in play in 1972. His name was Collis Temple. Now, Garrett Temple's father, and in fact, the whole Temple family had played basketball at LSU. But Dale was a little bit like Mike Krzyzewski in the sense that he struggled his first 3 years to field a winning team. But by 1978, he had a team that was capable of and did beat the national champion Kentucky Wildcats in a 4 overtime game when all of his starters fouled out in 78. 79, my first year there, he brought LSU its first Southeastern Conference regular season championship in a quarter century. It had been since Pettit played that they had won a title. And he got on this run. Between 1979 and 1993, he had a hell of a run. I think it was 12 NCAA tournaments in 14 years, 4 SEC championships. He was the only Adolph Rupp had more regular season SEC wins. Billy Donovan eclipsed that a few years later, but I think he's still the third winningest coach in SEC history. And they made runs to 2 Final Fours, an Elite Eight, and 10 straight NCAAs, and 12 of 14 postseasons, 12 of those being NCAAs, the other 2 being NITs.
Wow.
Dale was, because he was from Minot, North Dakota, and because he wanted to infuse so much energy and enthusiasm into basketball in what had been, up until that time, just football country, he had to really win over the media, but he didn't have to win over me. I loved basketball, and he knew I loved basketball. And the opportunity for me to get to call LSU basketball on Tiger Vision was a bit of a work in progress. I was working at a radio station there, making $1,000 a month, giving away REO Speedwagon albums and feeling good about myself. Doing a little sports talk show at night, the first ever sports talk show in the history of Baton Rouge. And I was convincing coaches like Dale to come and be on my show. Well, he realized that I had a level of knowledge about basketball, and he asked me if I would help him with his coach's show. So I became an impactful player on the Dale Brown television show, interviewing players and doing features and that kind of thing. He told me, now this will show you how much care and concern he had, not just for his players, but also for people like me. Mm-hmm. He said, "Tim, I've got an idea." I said, "What is it, Coach?" He said, "We're going to have an opening here in the next year or two, because they're going to hire this AD, and he's going to do Tiger Vision. They're bringing this guy in from Miami." And he says, "I know you've won some awards for your high school football. Have you ever done basketball before on radio?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you need a tape." I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Well, look, our team is going to go to if we don't go to the Final Four this year, we're going to get really close. So here's what you do. When we go to the tournament, whether it's the first and second round, or if it's the Elite Eight, the regional, Midwest regional semifinals, whatever, we're down to 16 teams. When the first 2 teams lose, their media leads." And I said, "That's right." He says, "Well, there's a lot of open spots there along press row. You'll have a credential." He said, "Why don't you just bring your cassette recorder and get you a place, maybe 3 or 4 spots where there's no one around, cup your hand over the microphone and just call about 4 or 5 minutes of the game." I said, "Coach, is that legal? I mean, might somebody throw me out?" He says, "Well, don't get caught." He said, "But make the tape. Do it." So I did. And they were playing Louisville in the regional finals in the Elite Eight in 1980 with Darrell Griffith.
Yeah.
And that great team that went on, to win the national championship. Poncho, I mean, they had a hell of a team. Russ Bergman, all those guys were playing. Jerry Eves.
McCray.
That team played.
McCray
Yeah,
brothers,
that team. Yep, that's right, the McCrays. And so I called the game for like 5 minutes. I got 5 good minutes and held on to it. And when the new athletic director came in, I had that tape to play for him. That's how I got the job.
Wow.
Dale was a visionary. He thought, about how he could help and mentor someone like myself, not just his players, but someone that he took an interest in and a liking to. And that meant everything to me. And to this day, I talk to Dale Brown once a week. And he's as lucid now at 85. He'll soon be 86. In October, he'll turn 86. And we're in the middle of a campaign to get the court at LSU. In fact, on August 6th, I'm going to be in Baton Rouge because Collis is on the board of supervisors there. We're on a real crusade to get that floor at the Pete Maravich Assembly Center named after Coach Brown. It needs to be. So that's one thing. You mentioned John Saunders. When I arrived in Connecticut and was hired full-time, I'd been freelancing, still living in Baton Rouge when I met you, Chuck, and that Villanova team and the Big East games that I called in 85 at age 29. By the time I turned 30, I was being hired that fall doing CFA primetime college football. We didn't even have game day yet. I started college game day in 87 with Bino Cook and Lee Corso the next year and moved up to Connecticut full time. And when that happened in December of 1986, John Saunders was being hired out of WMAR in Baltimore. I was coming from WAFB TV, the CBS affiliate in Baton Rouge. Unbeknownst to either one of us, Steve Bornstein, who was the vice president of production at that time, wanted us to do the 7 o'clock Sports Center. Gail Gardner and Chris Berman were doing the 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock Eastern Sports Center. They wanted John and I to be the guys for the 7 o'clock. And we were the newbies. We were the second wave, the second wave of people being brought in. ESPN was 6 years old at the time. And it was such a thrill to be with him and see him kind of go through what I was going through simultaneously. He had just married. He would later have 2 daughters. I was married with 1 daughter already, and we would have another one coming. And our wives became friends, and we just sort of traveled the same path. We had completely different backgrounds. I mean, you couldn't be more different than John and myself. He was very laid back and confident. I was, the kid that could talk to a wall, never shut up, probably more insecure than John. But I was unafraid to let him know what my insecurities were. And he felt similarly towards me. For whatever reason, John, who was, I think, a little harder for people to connect with, he felt a connection to me. So he shared things with me that he wouldn't share with anyone else. And I sort of knew that. And we became really, really good friends. And like, not just friends at work, but friends that were classic friends that talked all the time about literally everything. And, I miss him every day. I recently went into the Louisiana Sports Hall of Fame just a couple of weeks ago. And I think about the people that crossed through my life. Coach Brown was a little too ill to come, but we talked before I went, and he watched it. It was being televised on Cox Sports Television here, so he was able to see it. But I also talked to Wanda, John's wife, and, just let her know how much of a role John played in my career, in my life. And he was like a big brother. He was only about, a year and 3 weeks older. I think his birthday is February 6th, 1955. Mine is February 27th, 1956. So we were of the same generation. And we had goals, and we had aspects of our personalities that were similar enough that we connected. But his strengths were my weaknesses, and vice versa. He had not done any play-by-play, and I had absolutely been born into the business in play-by-play. And so when he got his first chance to do play-by-play, I helped him put together boards. I showed him sort of the lay of the land. And then when it came to hockey highlights, you can imagine how much hockey I saw in my life. I needed some help. Yeah, what's the difference between icing and offsides? You need to tell me. And he would take me out to the Hartford Civic Center to see the Whalers play and, really show me the game. He also, like all hockey players, could play great golf. And he got me off the fast pitch softball league field and got me to the golf course. And I'm forever grateful for that because I love to play golf. And John could hit it a mile. And he watched me suck playing golf for 3 years and didn't mind. That's a great friend that doesn't mind having a guy, scraping the ball around a golf course in Connecticut for, 3 months out of the year.
That's important that you have, friends and mentors and stuff that you can lean on as you progress through your career. Right, Tim? I mean, that those two guys, without those two guys, you might not be where you are, right?
Well, Chuck. I mean, I tell people all the time, the calendar has to be good to you. It doesn't matter how talented you are. Talent's a lot of it. When the red light comes on, you got to be good, and good enough to have a substantially long career. But off the air is where you, I think, can really spoil a long career. Most mistakes that are made by people in our business, when you stop and think about it, just look back at the history. Most mistakes that are mistakes made off the air, not on the air.
Right.
It's about engaging with people. It's about those in the workplace understanding that you're coming from a prism of love. You're coming from a prism of trying to be better. And if there's a misstep along the way or any confusion, that you have an understanding and self-awareness to say, hey, if that was something that bothered you, understand I meant no harm. I was one of those guys that, as I said, felt like I could walk into any room and talk to anybody. But a lot of times I think that would send the signal of, who is this guy? He seems pretty confident and cocky. What the hell's his deal all about? Right. Especially in New England, where people just don't talk or say hello as much as people in the South might. We would walk down the street in the South and nod and say, hey, how you doing? And at least at that time in the Northeast, if you were too kind to people, they thought you had an angle, that you, who is this guy? And John worked with me a little bit on that and said, hey, Tim, not everyone is as trusting of people as maybe you are, and you need to understand that. So sometimes it's better to just wait for people to react before you open up. So, but at the same time, there were such circumstances where John needed to come out of his shell a little bit.
Right.
And I helped him with that. So it was great give and take. And you're right, Chuck. We all need, and I think the calendar has a lot to do with it. We all need certain people in our lives to cross through to really make a difference. I've said this many times, but it's true. If we meet 5 people in our life, okay, I've been at this now for, about to be 50 years. If you meet one person for every 10 years in your life that has tremendous influence on you, you're a very fortunate man. And when I think of the people that crossed through my life that were off the air, that were executives that for whatever reason thought I was pretty good and gave me a platform, I was really lucky in that area. And then if not them, someone that was just a friend that happened to be in the business, like a John Saunders, the opportunity to work, Dick Vitale was my first game, Duke in Virginia in '85. I'm working with Dickie V, who's probably the most insecure person on the planet. And he cared. He was wondering how he sounded that day more than I was worried about how I sounded, but Dick was a wonderful guy. He would give you the shirt off his back. I mean, Dick is as good a guy as you'll ever meet, but he's unique in that regard.
Right.
Bill Raftery is without question one of the most influential guys in my life because he's willing to share difficult truths with you. If he likes your work and you're friendly with Bill, he'll take you aside while he's having that Uncle One More at 11:30 p.m. after a basketball game.
Legendary.
Timmy B, if you just back off just a little bit, those kinds of conversations meant a lot to me. To have worked with Jim Valvano in his prime, and to have worked an NCAA tournament all the way through the regional finals with Al McGuire. I mean, my God, what a lesson in life I got from the first flower child in college basketball history. I've truly been blessed to have worked with the all-time greats, not just in terms of their performance on the air, but how they helped shape me off the air.
I got to go back to, since you mentioned Rolly and Louie, I got to go back to the other two coaches I'd like to hear your take on, or experiences, or any stories you'd like to share. I would love to hear. Coach Boeheim and Coach John Thompson. Go ahead. Fire away. You have the platform.
Oh,
I think you said enough right there by shaking your head, but
Jim is like, one of the great thrills of my life is, he and his lovely wife that he met through Patino in a Kentucky Southern Belle, Julie. Right. She's a sweetheart.
Yeah, Julie.
She did more for his Q rating than my wife did for mine. Okay. Trust me when I tell you that. And my wife of 42 years did a hell of a lot for me. A lot of folks who saw Boeheim, who was all about Jim all the time, when they saw him succumb to being fourth string at home after he married Julie, was like, okay, Boeheim's a pretty smart guy. When he called me to come and speak at his gala that he has for the Coaches versus Cancer Foundation, really Julie does all the, the heavy lifting for that thing. That was a real thrill for me because I'd known them for quite some time. And Jim was just, he was, no matter what you said to him about how great his team was, whether it was with Sherman Douglas or Derek Coleman and Stevie Thompson and those guys, or fast forward to McNamara, right? And those guys, you would just say, so Jim, it's good, right? No, it was like, Jesus, does this guy ever can you just enjoy it? Now, when Carlissimo came to town, and I had some good fortune there too, I think PJ was like at one point 0-18 against Boeheim at Seton Hall. And one of the things that happened back in those days, the grand old days of the Big East, was when you went to Syracuse, you went to the original Grimaldi's after the game. And our ESPN crew would go after a big Monday, and they rolled out the red carpet. I mean, it was like, oh my God, it was like, here comes the hors d'oeuvres, here comes the wine, and that was really the only time Boeheim would come out after a game, because he knew PJ's in town. And in those days, they weren't taking charters, or they weren't leaving. And even if they were, PJ would hang and let the team go back, and he would wait for Boeheim at Grimaldi's until the one year when PJ won. PJ wins. He's like, well, of course he's coming. I mean, I got my ass kicked for, 15, 16. And he's like, so we're there and everybody's having a great time. And it was like, no Boeheim. So finally the call to me, PJ was, what's going on? He was like, well, you won. Well, it's what? And the answer Boeheim gave was, well, you don't pay your golf bets, so I'm not showing up after you kick my ass. PJ never, ever pays a golf bet. It doesn't matter how much there is on a hole. He never pays the golf bet. We should have had you on before PJ. We should have had you on before. We're playing at the Valvano tournament, playing a practice round at the Jimmy V Celebrity Classic. This is like 1996, 7. 10 cuppages come out, maybe 95. And I'm about a 15 handicap, but I'm really into golf at this point. I'm living in a golf course community in Louisiana, and I'm playing, and it's Boeheim and me against Gary Williams and PJ. Now, PJ, like me, is about a 15, 16 handicap. Gary's about a 12. And Jim is about, at that time, probably a 2 or a 3, almost scratch.
Really good. Yep.
Really good. And I'm like a 15. So we're playing to our handicaps, full handicaps. And I want to say it was like $10 a hole. And if you wanted to press, you could double the bet, whatever. Well, Jim is spraying it a little bit. And but I'm off to like a par. I think I parred the first 4 holes, which, given the shots I was getting as a 15, we're up like 4 holes to none. And I'm like, Jim, it was like, this is great. And Jim comes over to me and he says, Brando, just, chill. And I said, what is it? He says, well, he's not going to effing pay. He doesn't pay. I mean, he makes bets, but he doesn't pay. I was like, what? He says, no, that effort never paid for F blank. I'm like, damn, okay, all right. So we just kept on playing, and the round is over. And as soon as the round was over, we should have won, 100 plus. And Boeheim says, no, he's not going to pay. Of course he's not going to pay. And what did PJ say? Well, of course not. You stood me up at Grimaldi's the first time I beat your ass. I've never beaten your ass.
That's great.
Well, you know, Italian.
I mean, these stories, Sonny. That was what the Big East was like in those days. Coaches did get together after games sometimes.
Right.
Okay, after just started. It was just an amazing thing to watch and be a part of. As a young broadcaster.
Well, Italians, we hold on to things a little too long, like a little.
You think?
A little tiny bit.
I remind my wife of that every day. Her maiden name is Glorioso, by the way.
There we go.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So give us some memories, Tim, of the Big East games. What were some of the more fun games that you called during your time with the Big East?
Well, I was getting to call a lot of Big East Wednesday night games on ESPN. The big Monday games were generally always going to be Mike Gorman and Rath. But on occasion, when Gorman was tied up with the Celtics, I would have an opportunity to do a big Monday, which was always a thrill. And I used to kid Mike. I used to say, hey, it took me longer to get Gavitt to allow me to do games because I had a Louisiana driver's license. Yours was from Rhode Island. You could sound like you were from Rhode Island.
Your homeboy.
Get an opportunity a hell of a lot more quickly than Louisiana. But we did a Wednesday night game between number 1 Syracuse. This was a January game. Billy Owens was a freshman, I want to say. And oh God, help me out. I'm having a brain cramp here. Sean Miller is the point guard at Pitt, playing for Paul Evans.
Yep.
And they had a hell of a team. They had a hell of a front line.
Jerome Lane.
Yeah. Well, Jerome, and they also had who was the other? Yeah. They were that team was loaded. This would have been 1987.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the year we went to the final game. Yep.
And but it was Sherman lobbing it, Stevie dunking it, Derek Coleman lob dunk. That. But Sean had one of these great games in terms of controlling the tempo, and Pitt just stayed in the game, and they got a great start, and they never let Syracuse get on one of those unbelievable runs. And they wound up doing it. I just always remember how much fun it was to be calling a game of that magnitude with a kid like Sean Miller, who really was directing traffic like a true maestro. You know, just they couldn't turn him over. He played smart. Everyone was. It was just an unbelievable game. I thought that was just an incredible game. Seton Hall with PJ was just emerging in the late 80s.
Yep.
Right.
And speaking of being in a house with Mr. Bob Shepard, going in to do the hall at St. John's in 89, when he had Gaze and all those guys that got him to Seattle. Not only are you in the room with Bob Shepard, but Marty Glickman was calling the games for the Hall back then.
Right.
Wow. He was the broadcast. He was the play-by-play guy for Seton Hall. Well, I had never met Mr. Glickman, heard all about him, and I introduced myself to him. And I'll never forget this because I'm going to use. I've got a microphone over here. This is Marty Glickman doing a test. This is Marty Glickman doing a mic test for the flagship station in New Jersey. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Marty Glickman, Seton Hall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I just was like, oh my God, that's Marty freaking Glickman. And so whenever I do mic checks now, sometimes I'll do Marty Glickman. You know, he was very big on pronouncing the words, and the diction was a big Marty Glickman. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Just like Bob Shepard, he pronounced everything precise.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I got to talk with him for about 15 minutes before the game, and he was so kind to me, fellas. It was, Tim, I understand you're from south of the Mason-Dixon line. I certainly am. He said, well, might I tell you, without offending you, that you've done a marvelous job of getting rid of the South in the mouth. I said, well, thank you, Mr. Glickman. You know, I worked with, you must have had a father in broadcasting. I said, I certainly did. He said, well, when you went home, I bet you he told you to turn the light on, not on. Never really thought of it that way, Mr. Glickman, but you're right. There are like 4 or 5 words he said every time he talked with a broadcaster from the South. He would remind them that the problem wasn't necessarily just being lazy with our diction. It was an inability to understand pronunciations. Like, how many times do you hear a kid say, I don't get it? No, it's get. It's not get. Turn the light on. You don't own the light. You just want the light on. And fur instead of for. How many times have you heard someone say, what for, as opposed to what for? Right. He reminded me of these things.
Yeah, he's 3 for
5.
You,
it was so enlightening. I have 15 minutes with Marty Glickman giving me a reminder, a little history lesson on diction and phonetics was just a thrill. But just to be in that room, you know, doing a game was off the charts. And you know what? The funny thing about those days, Chuck and Roley and your coach, the collection, Big John, you're talking about John Thompson. I had Bill and Billy Packer. You guys remember that game, I'm sure. Packer and I were going to do a Sunday game on CBS between Illinois. Illinois was playing at home against Ohio State. It was a Sunday game. And Georgetown had just played Pitt the day before. And that's when they had the big fight. Remember the huge fight that they had? And yep. Raftery took off on Georgetown, saying enough already with the Hoya paranoia. And you guys remember that? You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Shortly after that, and the thing that really rung so true to me was what a lovely man John Thompson really could be. And people thought of him as this intimidating and, you know, always a scowl.
Yep.
And yet he was such a sweetheart. Raft took off on his team, and a few years later, I'm doing the game in Illinois, and Packer had a moment with Allen Iverson playing. This is like a few years later, and it was the Packer moment about Iverson. You remember the tough little monkey called Allen Iverson a tough? You remember that deal? It was a huge controversy.
Okay.
When Packer used the term tough little monkey. Well, that was a term way back when Billy was playing that a lot of guys used that players would know about. Okay, and because John was from the same generation as Billy Packer, I want to make sure we get this straight. It was Packer, not Raft. Everyone in the media was taken off on Packer. I was going to work with Billy the very next day. I was traveling when that game was being played, so I didn't know anything about it until I got to the arena. And one of the truly great officials of that time in college basketball was working the game, happened to be African American. And he came up to me and he said, "Tim, this is going to be quite a day." And I said, "Oh, really? What happened?" And he had the game and knew what the fallout had been. It was just amazing that John Thompson went out of his way to say, "Listen, y'all, you guys back off." Billy Packer meant nothing. That's a term that was used when I was playing, and any player that played in those days knows the prism from which that came. He meant that in a complimentary vein. And I'm going to tell you, Sonny, it was my first sort of introduction to what was deemed politically incorrect, politically correct. How do you handle a moment when something slips out and you could be condemned for something that you might have said? And Billy handled it appropriately. And I remembered a few years earlier when Raft was in that series. Bill Raftery is as beloved as anyone. And when he went after Georgetown for being too intimidating, for almost, in his mind, looking for a battle when maybe there wasn't one, in both cases, Big John had their backs. Mm-hmm. You know, Big John knew right away and defended, both Raft and Billy Packer for two separate sets of circumstances. Raft said what he saw. He said it. And John was okay with it then, and he explained why. And then when Billy said what he did about Allen Iverson, he meant it in the most complimentary of ways. And while everyone else was ready to jump, I mean, they were ready to jump all over Billy Packer, John was there to say, "Listen, I've known this man for years. I know from where his thoughts were and where that word came from, because it came from the streets of the city, came from the blacktops. It came from, that's what it's all about, is just understanding who these people are and how many boxes do they check on the basis of the type of person they are and what they've meant to the game and what they mean to you as a coach." And just watching that happen, and I saw it many times over. John's could be a very intimidating guy to a lot of people, but he was also a sweetheart and very understanding human being in more ways than one.
Yeah, he liked that, and he definitely was cerebral and way ahead of his time, and a much needed figure in basketball and in the world community, I think.
Yeah, no question. And I'm going to tell you something. It meant the world to me that all of those coaches from that era sort of signed off on me, because you know how this is, Chuck.
Oh yeah.
When those coaches would meet at the Big East meetings in the off season, and the subject of television came up, they were talking about the announcers. So what about this guy? What about that guy? Well, he's a blah blah blah. Yeah, well, and to be embraced by the lifeblood of a broadcaster is the relationship that he has with the coaches he's covering in college basketball. And I had a wonderful relationship with all of those guys, and they were all different. And God knows I was different. I was the only guy from Louisiana or any other southern state that was calling Big East games on a regular basis. And so fast forward to now, I go to Fox 7 years ago, and they sign a deal with the Big East of all leagues, and I'm doing this conference on a regular basis. How cool is that?
That's awesome. Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I agree. That's fantastic. It's almost full circle for you.
Yeah, it is. That's how it feels to me. Yeah, I had never done a Big East tournament until 2020.
Oh wow!
First time I'd ever done a Big East tournament. And of course, it's historic for all the wrong reasons. Right. We get called off at halftime of a quarterfinal game.
Yeah.
But then this past year, we had this incredible run by, of all teams, Georgetown, to win it. I did the first 2 days of the tournament this year. I still haven't been at the Garden with it packed. I haven't gotten the full treatment yet. So
yeah,
I'm happy to report
that a lot of guys.
I'm happy to report that I'll be back for a number of years. I re-upped with Fox just a few weeks ago, so I'll be back, and I'm really looking forward to the full treatment with the Garden full. But just getting to do Big East tournament games, even at 65, it's cool to be able to say you're doing something for the first time.
Yeah, you're gonna love that when you get there on that Saturday night game, that championship night, because it's so electric. And everybody that we've had on, especially the former players and the coaches that we've had on, have all said the same thing. There's nothing like that. You have to experience. I can't describe it to you. You wouldn't get it. But until you walk in the door, man, you feel it. It's unbelievable.
It's a whole different dynamic, and that that even without fans.
Right.
Just watching the players, the energy from the players walking into an empty Garden after, the long dog days of February, just this past year, was pretty incredible. But I've done ACC finals, SEC finals, and I'd never done a Big East tournament of any kind. A Big East tournament first round game. I don't know if you guys remember that night, the night before sports stopped, we had St. John's and Georgetown.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the last game played with a crowd. It was electric in there. You would have thought it was Walter Berry, Mullen going up against Ewing because of, oh my God, it was, and it's a first round game. I mean, these two teams, I think, were, the last seeds in the tournament, but you would have never known it given the environment in there. It was incredible. So, yeah, I feel like at this stage of my career, I have never been more grateful for the opportunities that not only that I have now, but that are out there in the future for me.
Well, we're up against it a little bit, Tim. So I want to ask you one final question, if I can. If you ran into a middle school kid like you were when you first got the bug, what would you say to the kid? What advice would you give to a kid coming up who wants to get into broadcasting and do what you do, based on all the successes that you've achieved and everything you've accomplished in your career? What would you tell a kid that was coming up?
First and foremost, just find out who you are. Be the best version of yourself. And that's not easily accomplished. We're all a work in progress. I mentioned Raft a short time ago. And I really want to say this because Billy's such so funny, so charismatic, so beloved that maybe you wouldn't think that there's a serious side to Bill, but there is. Probably more so than any other broadcaster. Bill has been a mentor off the air to remind me of the better version of me. And the better version of me is generally when it's we, sharing with one another.
Right.
You can't do what we do without having a great deal of confidence, to look into a camera and go into millions of homes every night. You got to be fairly confident in who you are in trying to convince people that what you're talking about is relevant, and please listen to what we've got to say here. But at the same time, we need to listen to one another quite a bit in order to get better. And I think that that's the issue for most young people coming up into our business, is to understand that being the best version of you is always going to include your understanding that it's not about you. It's about us. It's about the people that you're working with, not just on the air, but the people that are facilitating what you're doing off the air. Those are the ones that are going to make you look good and sound good through the course of the night while you're broadcasting. And while you're thinking about the future, and we're all in a hurry, you know, especially you mentioned today's middle school kid, today's high school kid, college kid, they all want it now. They all want it immediately. And you know what? I did too. You know, I was on a relentless search for success. That's the journey I was on. I was on a relentless pursuit of success. Sometimes when you get caught up in that, you can forget the here and now. You know, you need to be able to appreciate what you're accomplishing and what you're trying to accomplish now, okay, as you move forward. The journey is the best part, but you need to be able to remember it, okay? If I have any regrets, it wouldn't be the path taken. It would be that I probably wasn't as grateful for the path taken as I needed to be. I am remarkably grateful now because I know that I've been given platforms from 4 different networks over 4 decades. That's not easily accomplished. When I left CBS in 2013 for 9 months, fellas, I didn't know what it was going to happen. I didn't know who I was going to join up with. Was it going to be ESPN again, the SEC network? I really wanted to go to Fox. I mean, I desperately wanted to go to Fox, but I didn't know that it was going to happen. So it was a wake-up call in a lot of ways. Tim, no one's promising us tomorrow, and this is all I can do. You know, people used to ask me, what motivates you? I would say fear, because I've got no other skill set. This is it. Okay. It's either this or paint white lines down the streets of my hometown. And at 58, I really wanted it to continue. I wanted my career to be a marathon, not a sprint. I didn't want it to end at 58. And with the help of Fox, I've gone into a position of some rarefied air. 4 decades with 4 networks, and I'm moving in on 40 years at the network level coming up here shortly. So I feel blessed. But if we don't appreciate where we are now, we're not going to be able to get to wherever we're going to go. And I'm happy to report that I still believe at age 65 that my best shows are in front of me, and I still dream about great games that I haven't been assigned to yet. And that's the way I want it to be for as long as it can possibly be. So just be comfortable being who you are, but recognize what it takes to be comfortable being who you are. And that means relationships. Just absolutely absorb every relationship that you have with the lovely people that cross paths with you. And I've certainly had my fair share.
Well, that's a wonderful way to wrap this up. Tim, we can't thank you enough for joining us. We had such a great time talking with you today and listening to your stories and stuff. It's been awesome. We really,
you know what Raph is going to say. Every host of every show, when he's concluded a Brando interview, has said, well, we're kind of up against it now. Even on one of these, we're running out of time, Tim. For Christ's sake, shut up.
I got to ask you about what's that ring on your left hand?
Oh, I did the Braves. Sort of the career hiccup period. I was a big Braves fan as a kid. The AA Farm Club for the Atlanta Braves was here in Shreveport, and I was a bat boy for the team. And I also, in the time that I was away from ESPN and before I went to CBS, for 3 years I worked at Turner, and I got to work with the great Ernie Johnson Sr. on Turner's own Sports South. We did 45 games for 3 years together when they were World Series champions. And the 94 season when they had the strike, the 95 season they won it all, and when they lost to the Yankees, when Wohlers could not get that out when we needed it, when Jim Leyritz took him deep. But those 3 years I did Braves games, and so it was one of those good timing awards. We talked about the calendar, right? The calendar was good to me. Probably the most forgettable period of my career was one in which I got a World Series ring.
That's great. really good.
Right.
You've been listening to the Big East Rewind with Sonny Spera and Chuck Everson. The Big East Rewind is produced and directed by Daryl Gurney and Nick Chico Chorus. You can check us out on YouTube. Please hit like and subscribe. We're also on wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be Spotify or iTunes. We're at all those places. And if you have any comments about the show or any kind of concerns or anything we'd like to see us do, give us a call. I mean, an email, not a call, at bigeastrewind@gmail.com. Thanks a lot. Have a great night.